Hi guys, and welcome back to Bitesize Excel. In this week's video, we're going to take a look at some options that allow you to filter and summarize your data in a more advanced way within Excel. Now we're going to use a very simple example in this week's video. If you'd like to follow along, you can download this video. I'll leave the link in the description below. Now in this example, we have a table of data. It's formatted as a table, which I've done by going to Insert and Table once I had my data inputted. And once you've got your data in table or just filtered, you can always filter your data by using the little drop downs here at the top. So you can filter, say, number filters, greater than, less than, and so on. You can filter by your year, or in this instance by your colour. And these filters do allow you to check and summarize your data. So say I want to just look at 2020 and 2021 and know how many of this number 1 were in there. We can see we get 404. However, this can be a little bit clunky when you get really large data sets. And there are some useful functions within Excel that allow you to do this in a much more dynamic way. And these are these functions up here, which is DSUM, DCOUNT, DCOUNTA, DAVERAGE, DMIN and DMAX. So let's run through how we use these. I'll just take my filter off here first. So essentially what these do is they look at your table and they will then summarize a particular column by any number of criteria that you define. So let's first look at this DSUM. So what this does is it sums your data. So we go equals DSUM. And the first field it's looking for is your database, and this is essentially your table. So you need to select your entire table. You'll see in this instance I have table 1, all. You then want to say the field that you want to sum up in this instance. Now there's a number of ways that you can do this. I'll run through them all. The first one is you can put in the number of the column you want to sum. So say I want to sum number 1. I would put in a 2, and that's column 2. So this is the first way of doing it. And the next criteria is your criteria for filtering. Now what I've done and what you'll need to do is you'll need to put in 2 rows into your workbook. You will need to have the headers that you want to filter by exactly as they are in your table. And then another row below that is where you're going to put your filtering criteria. So for now we're just going to select that table. I'm going to make it absolute and I'm going to hit enter. And what it's telling me is that this number 1 column sums to 647. If we were to select it all, you can see that that's correct by looking down here at the bottom. However, say I want to only look at values that are not 2019. You can put criteria in here. So say I want it not equal to 2019 and hit enter. You'll see that's now dropped to 404. And if we highlight the 2020 and 2021 figures, you'll see that that does add up to 404. You can also put your criteria in as just greater than 2019 and you'll get the same result. Or if you want to look at a specific year, say 2020, it will give me the sum of column 1 in 2020. So if we look at these 4 values for 2020, you'll see that it does sum to 172. You can also add in your extra criteria. So say I just want to know yellow. You'll see 61. If we look at yellow in 2020, you'll see it's 61. Obviously, if there were more options, you'd get more in here. So say, for example, if I added that black down the bottom here, put in some random numbers, make that 2020. And say I wanted to know all the criteria starting with the letter B in 2020, we could put in B and star. And when we hit enter, you'll see that that comes to 121. If I were to just double check that that actually has worked right, we'll select 2020 and we'll just select our one starting with B. And you'll see if I highlight those, it is 121. Now I've limited my criteria here to 2. If you've got a massive workbook, you can have as many of these as you want, as long as this part of the function is highlighting all those criteria. So moving on to DCOUNT, let's just unfilter my workbook. So go to data and clear. For DCOUNT, works in the exact same way. We go DCOUNT, we select our database, and then our field. And this instance, I'm going to do the second way of selecting our field, which is you can open some inverted commas and you can type in the exact name of the heading. So say I want to do number 1 again, close it, and then again we select our criteria. I'm going to make that absolute by hitting F4, hit enter, and you'll see the values or the count of values for starting with the letter B in 2020 is 2, which we know is right because there's one record for blue and one for black. Count A works in the exact same way, so I'm just going to drag this down and change the start of my function to count A. So what this does, similar to our count A function, is it counts cells that are not blank. So if I hit enter, we'll see we're getting that 2 again, but if I were to make this blue one blank, it drops down to 1. Moving on to DAVERAGE. We'll change this start bit again, and this time we're going to look at the third way that you can select your criteria. And this is using the match function. We've touched on the match function in previous videos, and I'll link to those videos in the description below. But essentially what we want to do, let's do our match function on the side to start, so we'll go equals match. We want our lookup value, so we want to look up our number 1 value. Now what I've done actually before we start is I've created this lookup column here. So say I want to look up number 1, we'll go equals match. Lookup value is number 1. I'll make that absolute because I don't want to move from this lookup column cell. Our lookup array is going to be all our headers. And then we want an exact match. And what this essentially does is it will tell me what number column that particular header is in. So if we hit enter, we get 2, which is similar to what we put in our first version of the formula. So we'll just take that, we'll copy it out, and we'll replace this number 1 bit in inverted commas. And when we hit enter, we'll also update our formula to DAVERAGE. You'll see that we get the average of all the ones that start with B in 2020. I'm just going to put my filter back on for a second. 2020, just our ones starting with B. And you'll see if we look down here at the bottom, average is 60.5. So this is really useful because if I then update this lookup column to number 2, it will tell me the average of these 2 numbers, which is 50. So you can very quickly change your lookup column and what you're adding or averaging. And very quickly, if we drag this down and update it to DMAX and DMIN, so we'll do DMIN in this one and DMAX in this last one, you'll see that for column 2, the minimum is 45 based on these criteria, and the maximum is 55, which is correct. And if we flicked it back to column 1, same thing, 50 is the minimum and 71 is the maximum. So these functions obviously become very, very useful if you've got a much larger table with loads of data in it and some very specific or morph criteria that you want to filter by. You can very, very quickly get an answer as to the total sum, the count, the number that aren't blank within a workbook, the average of whatever criteria you want to add up, and the maximum and the minimum values. If you've got any specific question on these functions, please do let me know in a comment. But I hope you found the overview of these functions really useful and can see the value in them. As always, do remember to like and subscribe, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video.